Really appreciate it, and thanks to everyone for coming this evening. I'm pretty excited to share tonight's program with you guys. We've got some amazing folks joining us this evening to talk about the parent penalty. So what are we trying to speak about is we've talked about the mommy penalty in the past and the negative effect it has on women's careers. The upside is, as we are kind of getting more equal in the careers, it also affects the daddies as well. And that pandemic has really highlighted that our workplace culture just is not friendly to men or women with children. I'm sure you've all had that experience. If not as parents, then you've gotten the opportunity to see your fellow coworkers as they are juggling Zoom school and babies and whatever at the same time that they were trying to be professionals in their careers. So a lot of us have been gifted with the opportunity to parent out loud, which maybe my son here will pop in here and you'll get to experience me parenting out loud. So while it is common for really in the past, it wasn't necessarily common, but now most caregivers in a family work full-time, and yet somehow our society hasn't caught up and hasn't kept up. And we're all kind of making choices and struggling with choices of how do we balance taking care of our families at the same time that we are effective co-workers. And so that's the parent side of it. But what about the companies? What happens is our companies work really hard to get great, wonderful, capable people to come in, maybe at the ground floor, and then they exit the workforce perhaps, or slow down their careers just as they're coming into their professional peak, right? Right about that time is when it's also parenting peak. And so the question is, are we missing an opportunity here? So we're going to have a fabulous opportunity to speak to some parents who are in the throes of parenting right now, and they'll share the different ways that they're approaching things. We're also going to speak to Kathy Odell, who has who will come and talk to us. She's got a breadth of experience, but specifically tonight, she's going to focus on the economic side, the corporate side, what are businesses missing? And then we'll also hear from Eileen Monahan, who is specializing in helping folks create a childcare solution and things like that. Come on in. This is my kid.
Hello.
Wait, they can't see you. There you go. Hello. Thank you, honey. Okay, so that was me parenting out loud. I'm sure through the time of COVID, you all got to experience that at some point or another. Before I go any further, wanted to acknowledge something. I think we have a couple of privileges or gifts that we are all receiving, which is number one, the generation before us has worked hard to where we, even men and women, have a choice in terms of, are they going to be full-time workers? Are they going to be full-time stay-at-home? They have these gifts. The downside is now as parents and professionals, we need to navigate the path. So that is a gift. And an additional privilege that we have is that we are even in a position to discuss careers versus parenting and how do we navigate this. And I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that there's plenty of people out there who don't even have the privilege of having that conversation, right? They are just trying to make ends meet. There's no discussion of which way should I do this. They're just in the grind. So wanted to take a moment to acknowledge those folks. And then the last thing I wanted to do is introduce myself. I'm a project program manager for a medical device company called Terumo. And I have done that. I've done new product development throughout my career. I actually started with MIT, so that's where my heritage comes through. And I am part of a dual career couple, and I've been mostly in the corporate world, but I have also had experiences in smaller companies as well as startups. And I've even owned a yoga studio for a period of time. My husband also travels quite a bit. In fact, he is traveling this week, and I think I saw him actually joining us. Hello, good to see you. He and I work, we've worked our own method of navigating that path between managing our careers and taking care of our children. So I've got a little bit of experience on both of those fronts. So without further ado, I would like to bring in our first couple, and Elizabeth and Brian. Fosque Boyd is their last name. And Elizabeth is actually a writer and a stay-at-home parent. She's got a BA in linguistics and then not one, but 2 degrees in law from Georgetown University. From a career perspective, she's worked for the executive office of for the U.S. attorneys and has been in residential development. But she really thought that was not challenging enough, so she turned to parenting, where she then has had to survive 6 years of co-op preschool, and she's serving her 2nd term as kindergarten room parent. And in her copious free time, she wrote a book, as one does, of course. As one does not necessarily succeed in, is her actual young adult novel is called Pest, will be published in April of 2022. So she's actually not just writing a book, but publishing a book. Brian is no slouch either. He's the principal of Fosque Boyd Construction, and it's a general contracting firm specializing in high-end customer residential projects. He earned a business degree from the University of Florida, where he and Elizabeth met. And he also spent a decade on the U.S. national sailing team, which I hope he tells us a tad more about, because that's fun. Again, and then also developed a career building homes and restoring historic properties in Annapolis. These amazing folks moved to Santa Barbara 10 years ago and have been embracing the chaos that is balancing careers and raising 2 daughters. So Elizabeth and Brian, I'm going to be quiet now and hand it to you. If you could tell us a little about your story. How did you decide the path that you decided? What made you make the decisions you made? And then, tell us a little bit about it all.
Thanks, Astrid.
Yeah.
Well, we met my 2nd week of college in 1998, and we had Caroline, my oldest, in 2011. So that gave us plenty of time to think about things, about 12 years. So we had even done workbooks on this, and courtesy of our premarital counseling. And we were both in agreement always that someone would be around with the kids until they started school.
Yeah, I mean, insofar as we planned that, and the great comedy that parents understand after they've already had kids is that you plan your parenting arc, but we knew that we wanted to invest the time when our family was young and our kids were young. And so one of the things that we kind of definitely wanted to talk about here was the title is The Parenting Penalty, and acknowledging that, yeah, there is that penalty, and that's definitely something to work on, I think, as a society. But we always felt that we were going to invest that time in our kids, and obviously investment requires sacrifice. So our planning was around how do we make this work so that one of us can invest that time and spend it with our children while they're young. And so that was it was always in our planning. thought process.
And we didn't necessarily intend for it to be me. It just kind of worked out that way. We moved to Santa Barbara on a wave Brian was riding. And so he was the employed one when we found out we were pregnant with my oldest. And
right. I mean, if in that planning, being married to someone with 2 law degrees, my natural understanding was, well, it's going to be me that's going to parent, right? I mean, the chief breadwinner, but it was just sort of, here's where the planning falls apart. Is we ended up pregnant with our first child, when I had accepted a position out here, and Elizabeth was sort of in between because we had dissolved our company back east. So so there was our jumping off point.
But that being said, although I have been a stay-at-home parent for 10 years, Brian has always been very involved and made sure he had flexibility in his career, especially we were in co-op preschool for 6 years. That requires a tremendous time commitment. And he was always able to negotiate a morning off to be there with the kids one morning a week. He served on the board of the co-op, and we found companies to be very receptive to his desire to do that. He made sure that was a condition of employment and has always been around, has been involved. He's built projects down the street from us so that he can help me in the mornings, get the kids out and walk down, with all his stuff in the wagon. I mean, we've been able to make it work, and which, as you say, is a tremendous privilege, although we have made some sacrifices. But courtesy of being in the co-ops, we've seen so many people manage that so many different ways. Complementary work schedules,
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think the common thread was always, how do we take what we have to do and find the space, with the kids as a, I want to say a priority, but I mean, they're kind of a mandatory, right? I mean, they wake up and they eat and they do things and they go to sleep. I mean, there's just all this, the kids are kind of a non-negotiable part. So, we've always sort of looked to everything that is a negotiable part of our life. And, hopefully careers to a certain extent, provide that opportunity to be flexible around how can we plan. And so, I am fortunate enough to work in a project-based business. So we, was always able to say, okay, well, how do we get all of this done? And it may not happen on a, hard, 7:30 to 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock timeline. There's going to be breaks and windows and opportunities to lean into the parenting side. So, we were always just trying to be flexible around that with, that side of finding a way to invest that time and also acknowledging that, yeah, it's a sacrifice for, professional opportunities
but as the great Sonny Crandell has told us many times, they're only little for a little while.
This is true.
That's the truth. And they do say that the shortest path to enlightenment is parenting, because you learn to get very zen with process and your best laid plans, as you guys said, get tossed out very quickly, especially if you're really committed to your plans. I have a question. What do you feel you've gained by making the decisions that you both talked about? Sacrifices. Let's talk about the sacrifices. What do you think, what did you have to sacrifice to enable you to be there and have the relationship that you've got? Because there's trade-offs, as it were.
Well, Brian has only recently gone out on his own. He worked for a company this whole time, basically, which gave us, that steady income, that predictability. And, now I should mention our youngest has just started kindergarten. So this year is a little bit of a changeover for us. Brian has launched his business. I'm finally leaning into the publishing and putting my book out there. So we sort of were just waiting and, you know, doing the parenting thing and doing sort of the minimum on our parts. I mean, I wrote, but I wrote on weekends when he was watching the kids, and you know, our house needs some work, and we haven't put the time or the money into that, and we're just now starting to change that too. I mean, we waited on a lot of things we wanted to do until we hit that point where both kids were in school.
Makes a ton of sense. And then, but you made a trade-off. So what do you think you've gained by taking the path you've taken?
Well, they're actually being remarkably engaged and quiet off somewhere else right now. And maybe we overplayed the production value or quality, but I mean, we gained that time with our kids, and we gained, you know, all of those moments, and you know, what hopefully will be those relationships, memories, you know, that we'll all have together. And that's,
If we'd missed it, we'd never get it back.
Yeah.
And we were able to really lean into that. We were able to be part of the Santa Barbara co-op preschool system because of our flexibility, and because honestly, I was home, although we've seen people do it a little differently, but I mean, you have to, it's a part-time job. You've got to have the time to put in it. And we got so much back out of that. We got an immense amount of parent education. We got our community. And that's something we wouldn't have been able to do without having a little bit of free time, which we then poured entirely into being in a co-op.
Makes a ton of sense. Well, thank you. Okay, so let me introduce you guys before you jump in. I'll be asking you the same questions as Elizabeth and Brian. But first of all, let me do my best to introduce you. You guys are small business owners in Santa Barbara. You two met at Palmer College while studying, Palmer College of Chiropractic, while studying for your doctorates. And you moved to Santa Barbara over 15 years ago and opened up a family chiropractic practice. And then as your business grew, you also got a family. So I believe your son is 11 and your daughter is 6. I have that? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so you, as far as I can tell, have been balancing your business and parenting, and definitely taken it as a team sport the whole time. And I realized that at some point, Nicole took more of the lead at home, and Neil, you took more of the lead at the office. So I'm looking forward to you speaking to us about how you decided to balance that. But I did want to share that as far as I could tell, during COVID, you realized with all the uncertainties, and it's on and off and closed and not, you know, open and all of that, you were challenged to try and have a kind of a steady state. So as a result, you turned to homeschooling, and now you share those duties, switching off, working, running your practice, and homeschooling your children. So taking it to the next level, team parenting and team business. And but I have to say, you must be doing something right, because these guys look alive, everyone. You're talking to the best of Santa Barbara winners for chiropractic. So congratulations. Please tell us your story.
Do you want to start? Well, we met in school up in San Jose, and then started our practice, moved down here in 2005. Open up our own practice, and then Palmer. So as that grows, we're you know, just the two of us here, and life is challenging, but easier retrospectively. And then Palmer is born in December of 2010, and that just changed the scope of things a little bit, obviously, as Elizabeth and Brian alluded to, that now there's someone more, you know, staying at home more, and someone's going to be at the office more. I don't know if we really delved into that too much and discussed it. I think it was just sort of a natural, all right, I'll take the reins at the office and you'll take the reins at home, because you're just obviously needed more. And that was the case for how long? Probably the first year. his life. And we're in a little different situation because we run our own practice, so we could set our hours and have a short day on this day of the week, or be in late this, different day of the week. So it was a little bit easier for us to maneuver around those challenges. And then, so then Palmer is 5 at the time that Eve is born. They're both December babies. So we've got a busy month ahead of us. So he's almost 11 and she's almost 6. And that, I'll let Nicole take over that, made it trickier to then manage. So we're right about at the point where Elizabeth and Brian are he would have been starting kindergarten right about when she was born, right? And then so just now I don't know if it's a balancing act or more of a juggling act is probably a more accurate way. You're just trying to keep all the balls in the air and do the best you can.
I think one thing Neil didn't mention was we had a nanny that allowed me to go to work during our infancy and during our children's infancy. And so that was kind of not a sacrifice at all, because both of our nannies were amazing people, but that was a little bit of a juggling act for allowing spacing that's appropriate when you're seeing patients. You can't just work one day a week. It would not be good for an acute patient. So trying to figure out a good schedule to work, and then organizing that with your child care provider, who was a nanny that we had with our family she just retired. We had her for 9 years, helping us raise our children. So I love that Elizabeth and Brian had spoken previously about who was going to stay home. And I think we just assumed that I would stay home. I don't remember having like an actual conversation about that, unfortunately, but I feel like over that time, I went from working full-time to working maybe 12 hours a week after recovering from the birth. And that was a big hit to my professional livelihood and my pace of practice. At that time, I also became really interested in specializing my practice. So having a child and getting interested in pediatrics and perinatal care was something that I gained from going through the experience of becoming a mother. And that's something that I still very much enjoy today, having that specialty. And I think the sacrifice of my professional momentum was slowly gaining as our first child grew and then went into school, and then halted again since the kids are so far apart. But the second time, as maybe many of the people listening know, the second time you have a child, it was way easier for me to return to work, for me to be away from the home. Probably easier, I mean, like emotionally for me to commit to being at the office more. So I think that's something that is a benefit of going through it a second time. For me, I was able to I was able to commit to being at work more sooner.
Yeah, and I mean, the sacrifices are many, and they're on both sides. There's, if sacrifices to being the best professional that you can be, if you want to be the best parent you can be, and vice versa. I mean, you can be both, but you can't be both at the same time. So you can be you can't be a great spouse, a great employee, a great dad, at the same time, right? Like there's gives and takes in those, and just, I think learning to be okay with that is, something I'm still figuring out 11 years into parenting, is just, you're not going to be the best at everything all the time, and that's okay.
Neil, you're way ahead of me. I haven't
Working
yet
on
figured,
it.
even that, I haven't even figured out that I shouldn't try.
You'll just be very tired trying.
Yeah.
I know. Cool. And well, I guess maybe the question for you guys is, and then I'm gonna bring Kathy on, knowing what you know now, is there anything you would do differently? Not, especially you said, Nicole, with the second one, it was kind of easier going. Is there anything you would have done differently? And are
think-
there any lessons learned for maybe the folks who are 10 years or 12 years behind you on the timescale?
I think one thing business-wise that we should have done differently the first time was we were not incorporated and I was not an employee, so I didn't get any benefits from the state when I had my first child. That cost, that was a financial hardship that we hadn't calculated. That would have been something I would have done differently. By the time we had our second child, I was an employee and I received the benefits through disability. And he got PTO for his bonding time. So that was a huge thing. And that's paperwork and planning ahead and all that good stuff. But that was a real benefit the second time around to making stay at home much less of a financial burden.
Well, and I'll go in a different direction. We've been lucky enough also, Nicole's folks moved down into town when Eve was maybe 1 or so. And just leaning on your network.
Yeah.
We have an amazing neighborhood and everyone has kids around the same age that we do. And again, we can't do it all. So, hey, we're not going to be like right now, our kids are at a end of soccer season party at a restaurant and grandma's there with them because we can't be in 2 places at the same time, So if you have family in town, lean on them. We've all been here. It's difficult. Every parent has gone through it. And if you have friends that are there, if you need help, ask for the help. Most people are going to be willing to, put a little extra effort
Yeah, and
to help out a friend.
Yeah, that's what that was a lesson for me. That's a really good point. Both of those points are very valuable. I know when new parents, at least I was in that boat, is trying to do it all yourself because we must be able to do it ourselves, and learning that, no, actually go ahead and ask for help because that's everybody wins in that. Even the folks who are giving the help feel good about that.
It takes a village.
I would say that's been, I didn't mean to miss that part, but thank you for bringing it up. Our neighbors in our neighborhood since before COVID, but definitely since the lockdowns and everything, have become an essential part. We are all an essential part of our everyday life. One person's taking the kids one day, I'm taking the kids a different day. Who's picking who up? We've really enjoyed with these 4 families, particularly, being able to literally be as a unit for whoever's doing whatever after school.
Yeah.
And not to put it in a negative tone, but to share the burden, hey, I have to race back to the office. Can you watch my kids for 30 minutes before Nicole gets home, or Sarah or the other neighbor? And yeah, of course, bring them over.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Thank you for those points. Appreciate it. So I'm going to pivot now and bring Kathy on. Hello, thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned, parents. Thank you. So quick introduction. Kathy Odell is currently the CEO of Women's Economic Ventures, which is a 501c3 dedicated to economic empowerment of women. She joined Weave as CEO in 2019 after a really rewarding career as a technology entrepreneur. She is a serial entrepreneur, so she understands firsthand the challenges of small businesses and the need to educate the public on the huge contribution of small businesses in our economy and their role in creating, sustaining, and vibrant local communities and economies. Before that, so a little bit about her history, just a tiny bit, is she was a co-founder of Medical Concepts, which was later acquired by Karl Storz Endoscopy. Then she was the CEO of Inogen. Today it's a publicly traded company, but during her tenure, Inogen received over $53 million in venture capital. She has been a director of the Pacific Capital Bancorp, Regional Community Bank, and where she has served as chair of Compensation Committee and is a member of the Enterprise Risk and Governance Committees, and currently serves as a board member in the USB Economic Forecast Project in the Santa Barbara South Coast. I love this. Kathy is, so she's a parent as well. So she knows how to juggle, what it's taken to juggle parenting and this illustrious career. And she's really committed to advancing women's entrepreneurship. And in each of her roles, she's witnessed the challenges of working parents. So without further discussion, why don't I hand it off to you, Kathy? Can you tell us, in your experience of leader of organizations, what are you seeing? What insight can you bring to us?
Well, it's really changed over my career because when we started Medical Concepts in 1985, and it at that point in time was actually as dual parent, working parent families were kind of hitting their peak. They had gone from just 43% in 75 to 63% in 85. And they kind of have hovered around there. So it was that period of time when we started seeing changes in our economy that led to more, two parents necessary to, sustain the family in the workplace, particularly here in Santa Barbara. So, from my early days, I had to deal with the fact that young mothers would, have problems of figuring out how they were going to leave the workplace. I myself was fortunate in that when I started the company, my son was 8 and he was already in school, and we had good after school programs, here in Santa Barbara. Felt safe. It was easy. We didn't have to worry about that, which was good because I didn't have a grandparent and there weren't a lot of child, care facilities. And so, but my employees didn't have the same opportunity. And back then, we didn't have, I sound really old. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have email. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have laptops. So, remote work or flexibility just really wasn't a possibility. If you were working, you had to go to the workplace. That was it. You were done. And so, we started looking at the employees' challenges and saying, okay, but what can we do with flexibility? We allowed more time off for parent-teacher conferences, for leaving early to go pick the kid up from childcare or coach soccer practice, or we used to allow time for volunteering. You got 4 hours a month, to be able to go and volunteer. And, we still saw the struggles because it wasn't until 93 when the family medical leave, was passed. And that gave employees 12 weeks of unpaid leave, but protected leave. You had to hold the job. And so for a lot of people, that was kind of an issue. For us, fortunately, because we were a medical device manufacturer, we had already done a lot of cross-training on jobs. And so we just started looking for ways that we could use that to also help mothers be out of the workforce for a while, and then maybe gradually, come back in. And we did find that worked well for our employees, because even though we would hold their job for them, very few employees could afford to be out of the workforce for 12 weeks. They just didn't take the leave. They couldn't. And yet, they really weren't up to like jumping back in. So for the fact that we could more easily protect their job because we had thought about this and done the cross training and the job sharing, and we would go out to our workforce because we had, back then about 150, 160 people, but we were very much a family. And so we would just go and say to people, okay, Sally's going to be out. She's going to be out these months. Are you available to cover? And we would get people that would cover the job. And so we found that because we did that, employees would notify us when they became pregnant. They wouldn't try and hide it. They wouldn't try and say, I don't know what I'm going to do. They'd come in and say, hey, this is what's happening and this is what I'm going to do. And I think I want to be out 6 weeks, or I think I want to be out 8 weeks. And we could work around it. Now, by the time we started Inogen in 2003, technology had helped us out a lot on flexibility. If an employee at that time, didn't have a cell phone or a computer at home, when they went out on maternity leave, we provided them one so that they could then, start to do some of the tasks at home that didn't, really require their physical presence. And, it didn't work for everybody. No matter what we do for the people who are not like Nicole and Neil and Elizabeth and Brian, like we had a lot, I ran a manufacturing plant. So we had a lot of people that didn't have the kind of flexibility there. And so for the ones that didn't have grandparents, it was really difficult because we don't have enough childcare in this country. We still don't, So it was really, really an issue. So, we're looking at it now. Weave is a very small company, but our last employee who had a baby was she was actually out for 16 weeks. And, we did cover her for all of that and allow her to work remotely. And then right as she was coming back, COVID hit. Well, we can all figure it out. So, that's, I think that we are very fortunate because we're getting into an age when we can figure this out. And the pandemic has sort of hit us in the face that we've had technology around since 2005 that could have allowed remote work, and companies didn't do it. Why not? So, I'm very anxious to see how we address this next phase. And I know you.
I wanted to ask you actually, so you, as far as I can tell, your approaches as a business leader have been really innovative and way ahead of a number of companies. Some of the things you've put in place are things that we're only now seeing in the workplace because, like you said, with COVID, we had to. There was no choice, and suddenly, wow, it turns out we can do our work from home if necessary, and we've got more of the technology now. Everybody just has a cell phone, or nearly everybody. So all of that is a lot more possible. What would you advise business leaders to endeavor to implement today, and why do you think that's worth their trouble? Why not just go, forget it, I'm not going to bother? What advice do you have for business leaders, and does it change smaller versus larger companies?
Yeah, well, there is no one size fits all, but I mean, okay, so I run an economic development company that focuses on social justice. So I happen to have a very strong belief that sustainable societies depend upon strong families. And so you should, as business, be creating the conditions that allow us to have healthy, educated children who become productive members. But if you want to get really practical here, okay, businesses should address this problem because they can't afford not to, all right? Corporations rely on trained, capable employees. We spend a lot of money recruiting and training employees. A company's investment in a manager over a few years could easily be $50K. And what does it cost to have an employee leave? So the annual turnover rate in the US in 2017, and I couldn't find any statistics more up to date than that, was 26%. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the cost of replacing an individual employee, according to McKinsey, ranges from 1/2 to 2 times the employee's annual salary. So a single employee making $80,000 could cost you $40K to $160K in replacement cost and lost productivity and training. So attrition costs for 20 employees could easily be close to $1 million. You can pay for an awful lot of childcare and extra health benefits and flexible scheduling with those dollars. And then there's a loss of economic growth. Just locally, Cuesta College up in San Luis Obispo did a survey earlier this year where they looked at 1,400 parents in the SLO County that were unable to work due to family obligations, and calculated that enabling them to return to work by deploying family-friendly policies would add $108 million annually to gross regional product. Right? That's $1. And so you look at that and you say, okay, those are real costs. And if I told any CEO that they were losing a couple $1 million a year, they'd put a project team on it and say, stop losing that money. Right?
Immediately. Yeah.
Immediately. And so, maybe they didn't think it was a problem, but the pandemic has told them it's a problem, because you have all heard about labor shortages with workers voluntarily choosing not to go back to jobs. We've seen more new business formations this year than we've seen in 25 years. We're on track to have 6 million new business formations this year. 49% of those are started by women. And when the women were surveyed, what did they say? They said they were doing it to get control of their schedule and manage family care. So and they're willing to walk away from employment if their employer can't provide the flexibility that they need. They're saying, I'm going to find another solution. So I think American business is going to have to figure this out.
Yeah. Because those folks who are have the gumption to start their own businesses, that's a major loss to the company that was trying to have them as an employee. That there's someone who would have been a stellar piece of that team.
Yeah, because that's beyond attrition costs. That's loss of your value in the future of somebody that was trained. And yes, you're right. The people that have enough guts to go out and start their business, probably. But there's lots of trade-offs, and some of these businesses are people who are saying, I'm willing to accept less income because I don't have to pay for childcare and that I can't find in the first place, and that it just makes more sense. I can be home with my child, and if I'm not commuting and I'm not paying all the rest of the costs of working, then I can take a risk and make a little less income on my own business. So
right, and then you wonderfully gave us some cold hard facts on the loss. I imagine you've got some ideas as well on the soft benefits that a company would get. I gotta believe there's some value that the company got from you giving your employees so much flexibility and so much care.
An attrition rate of 1.5%. And high morale, and I think that all of us realize today that our workplaces, unless you're in a gigantic workplace where you've got 5,000 employees, but even then your own work groups are small. But your company is your family. It's one of your families, okay? And if we care for one another and we make it easier to get through our lives, it's richer. We have less stress. We, providing more value to one another. And I think that a lot of the things that we can do, and Eileen, the next speaker, has got great stuff to talk about. But I think that like we've tried to approach this as a single business, I can't do anything. Well, but you can bond with others in the community, you can get with other businesses. I know that there are some efforts going on in Goleta at the moment to say, let's have a couple of companies come together and see if they can build a childcare center that serves all 4 or 5 companies that are, going to collaborate in this. there are, you know, there are just things we can do in community. And, you know, we have, you know, Santa Barbara County has taken some of the CARES funds and they're looking at that. And like I said, I won't steal Eileen's material. She's got it all. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have to say, as an employee as well, if regardless of how big or small the company is if I get the sense that my company is looking out for me, I'm going to be doing not just a lack of attrition, but also I'm going to be more committed to doing the best job I can. I'm more willing to step in and, like you said, help where things are going above and beyond. I gotta believe you've got some of those benefits as well.
Yep.
So Eileen Moynihan is a passionate advocate for early child care and education, and her company is Eileen Moynihan Consulting, expands access to childcare by helping develop facilities and design and implement childcare initiatives. And she doesn't just have book knowledge here. She's had over 20 years in childcare. And then she's honed her expertise through positions such as being the Santa Barbara County's childcare coordinator and manager for the first 5 Santa Barbara County's early care and education funding area. She's also consulted on a various number of projects with community organizations, school districts, housing developers, businesses, and as well as the state. And she's also worked on the California Master Plan for Early Learning and Care. She was born and raised in San Jose, so another Californian, and also is a parent of 4 children. She's got a bachelor's degree in developmental psychology and has got a plethora of additional education in land use, government policy, birth grade 3 systems, and work-life strategies. And with that, maybe I can just hand it off to you and you can take it away. Thank you, Eileen.
Thanks, Astrid. Hi, everyone. So I'm really happy to be here today. This is such an exciting topic, and I have to say that I feel like we could be here for 6 hours and talk about it and still not, tackle everything. But as Astrid mentioned, in my work, I help childcare operators, housing developers create childcare facilities, and also help employees conduct childcare and work-life assessments, and help communities and the state develop comprehensive plans. So I think sort of big picture and system-wise about the childcare industry. And one of the things that I see is that a lot of people in organizations, businesses, and nonprofits, they want to do something about childcare and other strategies that support families, but they don't know how to do. They don't know what to do or how to do it. And they sometimes give up because it's pretty complex. So, for me, that's the best part of my work, is figuring out those challenging bits that we don't want people to sort of stumble through or stop, and then helping them navigate through the process. And I have the advantage of having sort of a 360-degree view of all of these issues, because as Astrid mentioned, I'm a parent of 4. I'm also a grandparent. So, and through my career, I've been a supervisor and a manager. I have now and have had in the past relatives who have health issues and require my support. And as a chair and advocate and consultant, I bring those roles and experiences together to creatively design whatever the path is forward. So I wanted to just quickly say that I enter into this focus on children, because I feel like if we do a good job caring for our children, then our families and our communities and our economy will thrive. The research shows that, and our next generation will then evolve into better human beings because of the love and care they receive. So that's the core for me. But families need support to do this. I needed support. And, raising children is a full-time job, and then it's really difficult if you have another full-time job on top of that, as we've heard. And so, my passion for childcare comes from this understanding and knowing that if parents are going to, that parents are their child's first teacher. They're the most important in the children's life. And if they're going to entrust someone with their children, it had better be a really good place for those children. So I don't know if I have a little summary of childcare. Do you think that that's helpful? So I have a little childcare 101. So childcare is licensed by the state, and it's offered by individuals, for-profits, nonprofits, sometimes at businesses. Many childcare providers have just one site and have more. And there's a semblance of a system, but it's not completely comprehensive. The state's been supporting families with subsidies, and they contract with some providers for this service. And they've developed standards and some infrastructure for our state. And locally, we have a fantastic childcare planning council, and their job is to do long-range planning and to really support all the childcare in the county. And then we have Children's Resource and Referral, where you can get help finding and paying for childcare. And then we have First Five, that's a funder, and other funders who support the efforts to create the system. So everyone sort of pulls together to create a system, but we don't really have one yet. And you may have heard about the state and the federal budgets that have supports for childcare in there, like universal preschool and childcare tax credits and other things. And for the childcare field, it's a bit of a tectonic shift for me, in my opinion. I feel like there's so much happening at once. It's so hard to keep track. And it seems like it's going to be really good, and it's going to create more of a system that's dependable and affordable and what parents need. But, some of the changes are going to affect our current system, which is also going to have a negative impact. So unless we do it well. So for me, it's the time to put all the pieces in place, advocate, make sure that whatever happens next is what's best for children and families.
So I have a question for you,
Okay.
which is one of the ones. There's a number. I mean, there's so many, but I'm going to start with the one that is interesting because, as you're going through and helping communities create systems and maybe regulations and things like that to support parents and as they go through this process and businesses. At the same time, I think you need to thread the needle and not make so many rules that it becomes difficult for a business to do business in a community and therefore moves away. And so I think I can speak for all parents that we'd rather have the job than the support, right? Because then we have no job and I can do the child rearing myself.
Right.
So my question is, what have you seen that has been effective in communities that has helped thread that needle, if you will?
I think where in communities where the policymakers, the city and county leaders, and the nonprofit leaders, where they really hold child and family well-being at the core of their work, is they come from a place where that's something that they're always thinking about, obviously. And when those leaders also work with businesses to address barriers, which we were on a call with the Santa Maria Chamber, and they have and maybe this chamber, the Santa Barbara one has one too, but they have a business and government subcommittee. And I think that a lot can get done there, but government and nonprofits, they have funding, the government set policy, they develop services, they focus on economic development for sure. And so there are lots of ways they can support families. And one of my sort of specialty areas, and one that I really enjoy a lot, is mitigating and helping to change land use and permitting policies so that they actually help develop childcare facilities and don't create barriers. I'm on the Childcare Facilities Committee of the Childcare Planning Council, and we worked with the city of Goleta just recently. It was pre-pandemic, I guess, so a couple of years ago, to do that. And they ended up, because of our advocacy and because they wanted our input, they came up with model policies that others are now looking at. And developers are now anxious to include childcare in their projects. So that's going to help families, and therefore it'll help businesses as well, and childcare businesses, because they'll be able to, they'll have a facility to run. So I think that those kinds of things can encourage businesses to stay and might help mitigate some of the things that maybe the city and the county can't change.
So can you give us some explicit examples in that? What is it that's causing developers to clamor for creation of childcare? What have they done?
Well, they give them different cities and counties do it differently, but you can get, for example, a density bonus. So you can build your housing development on a larger footprint of your property if you include childcare. You might have fees waived, or you might be fast-tracked through the system. There's all sorts of things that can be done to encourage it. And I think, like I said earlier, I think a lot of developers would love to add childcare, but they have a bottom line, they have shareholders. So any incentive that you can provide, I think, helps that happen.
So it's more of a carrot than a stick, which is a fabulous.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked for a company before that was not interested in creating an on-site childcare facility. And from talking to Kathy, it sounds like maybe they weren't so much not interested as they were feeling challenged to do so. I was curious if that company happened and they were worried about liability issues, and they made ventilators. So I don't know that there's something with higher liability than that.
Yeah.
What do you think? Are the challenges that you're seeing, and what do you wish they would try? What do you think would help with that?
Well, first off, I think, there's childcare all over the United States, and liability is not an enormous issue. I think it's just like anything else. It's scary because you don't understand it, and until you do it, it's not comfortable. And so I think it's easy to think of what could go wrong. But I think one of the most important things for me in working with employers and organizations is that it's really important that they ask employees what they need, and that they keep asking them. I think a lot of employers, a lot of organizations don't want to ask employees those kinds of things, because then they think it's a promise, and then the employees will be disappointed. And really what I have found is that you can explain it and employees will understand. And we've done a number of, employee wellness and work life and childcare surveys. And, there are ways to just write it in there that we just want to hear what you're doing. If this seems like it's something that's going to work for you, then we'll consider it. And then, but really, making sure that there's a need is the most important thing, that your particular employees need that. You should never just start, especially something big like a childcare center, without knowing for sure that it's going to work. So, and I also think,
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say the other thing is that, like, we are so lucky to have Patagonia in our region. We always think of them first as, maybe not always first, but we think of them as the model. They institutionalized childcare, and they institutionalized a strategy, and nothing changed. They didn't close during the Great Recession. They continued to stay open. So it's a core strategy of theirs. And cottage said Cottage Health is the same, and neither of them measures their return on investment, although I bet we could, and I bet it would be really high. But they see the benefits every day when they see people taking the position because there's childcare, and so I think,
especially in today's environment where it's so tight to get an employee, that's a competitive advantage for sure.
Yeah. And I wanted to piggyback on what Kathy was saying about, in Santa Barbara, we don't have large businesses that can sort of hold a large childcare program, but we do have lots of business hubs, and this idea of a consortium childcare project is a really obvious and very exciting prospect that I'm anxious to support, and I hope happens in our communities. It helps the employees get the childcare that they need, and employers share those risks and the rewards. So it lightens the burden a little bit, and supports everyone.
Yeah. Well, and since you brought up Kathy, I wonder if now would be a terrific time to go ahead and bring all our speakers back, which is, when I stopped working, our calculus wasn't just a family question, it was a financial one. And the cost of childcare and homes and things like home support, like eating out, not, just all the stuff that you can't cope with because you've done the day job and then you've got the night job and all of that. So all of that cost, for example, we ate out quite a lot more. So then the cost of staying home was almost a financial wash, right? And then at the media, just like our participant said, is that we weren't alone in doing that calculus and deciding just have one of us stay home. But then those who are passionate about taking care of our children are paid such a small amount that they are forced to take extra jobs. It's quite something when someone with multiple degrees in early childhood development has to take a job at Starbucks to enable them to keep taking care of our children. That seems not quite right. So I'll throw it to you, Eileen, but I'd like to throw it to everyone. What's your experience? Are there solutions that you've seen implemented? What do you think?
Yeah, I am old enough to remember working in childcare back a number of years ago, and no one ever took breaks, and the pay was so incredibly low. So I see the improvement in the field, the professionalism, the education, and the salaries, but it's still not enough. And there are, with the state and local funds, there are workforce and federal, there are workforce initiatives that are going to be funded. I don't exactly know all the details yet of everything. No one does, but everyone realizes that this is an issue. And to top it off, those people who are working in childcare, they also have children. So, if you think about the bumper effect of that, it is really challenging. And they are, during the pandemic, childcare providers worked, and they were our heroes. They were providing childcare for essential workers. We did specific projects about that, and yet they still are paid not minimum wage, but not much more. So,
yeah. What's your experience, Kathy? I see you nodding your head there.
Well, I mean, that's a truism. There's no doubting it. But one of the things that I was saying to Eileen is that I wonder about, and this comes from my natural disposition to think like a tech person, an entrepreneur, but that I think that the problem is that childcare has been a cottage industry. And it has generally been somebody who cares enough, who opens up their home or takes in 10, 12 kids or something like that. And it has not been professionalized like it was at Patagonia or with the cottage healthcare system or something like that. And as this issue gets more attention and more heat, I think you're going to see a disruption in the industry. I think you're going to see some people coming in and figuring it out. And you've also got an incentive. I mean, it's like people who were making $7.75 an hour when the pandemic hit, and they suddenly said, no, I'm not going to work unless you pay me 15. Gee, now somebody figures out how to pay him 15. So I think that there are ways of approaching this from, again, just a very strict business value proposition, and how do we build it in? It of course would be great if the government would come up with some funding for it, but you know what? Businesses have usually solved problems ahead of government. And so I think that, when you've got, like, I know that Deckers is looking hard for a solution for all of this, and they do provide stipends for their employees. And so they can do a lot of things to say, maybe we can actually do this even semi-profitably. So I think it's coming. I think there will be a change. It's just not here yet.
How about the parents? How's the financial calculus?
That you spoke of at the outset of the threshold, this we can take one income away, and again, this is from our perspective of we didn't seek out childcare. We sought out the option where one of us would drop out of the income producing game and be the care provider for our kids, and one of us would have to fill the void. So yeah, that calculus was, what's that threshold and can we get there? And we were, fortunate enough to be able to do that, but that doesn't mean there wasn't sacrifices in terms of opportunity costs. So,
Nice. Right?
Yeah.
But we started from the premise that, and long before we ever contemplated having children, a very good friend of ours who at the time had a thriving career, and still does, as a psychologist, and amazing sons. She told us, she said, babies should have parents and taking care of them. And so we sort of started from that premise. That was our goal, to have a parent taking care of our children. We didn't have to have children.
Well, and I feel like, and we're in that same situation where you're in a lucky enough to be in that situation where you have a choice in that matter, and you can run the math and go, okay, this makes sense to have a nanny come in, or this makes sense to have them go to childcare. And a lot of people, that's just literally a math equation that doesn't work. And so that's a whole nother layer. What Kathy was alluding to is, this is a big issue and it's not going away, and it's getting pushed to the forefront for sure.
Yeah. I wanted to pivot a little bit and go back to the parents, because you guys haven't had a chance to speak for a little while. I wanted to get your thoughts of completely I kind of call it the ninja working parent tricks. Are there, for those who are maybe thinking about becoming parents or trying to plan out their careers, is there anything you're feeling particularly proud of in your efforts? That you could, if just like Elizabeth was talking about somebody giving them some guidance when they were thinking about being parents, is there anything that you would, hey, give me ideas? What works? Great. And in fact, they're not the only parents, so I'm throwing it out to everyone.
Well, I'll jump on that. I just personally, I've always been kind of like the control freak, right? Like, I want to be on top of everything that I'm doing and I'm a part of. And as a parent, I realized that was not compatible with being able to pivot quickly and be parts of, have parts of my life be a parent, and then, turn quickly back into a work environment. So sort of learning and cultivating in my work life to have things that I didn't have to be there for every moment of every hour of every workday. So, delegating and, creating work processes that, other people could pick up and run with, or, that I could, make that Tuesday work day at the co-op happen, and everything didn't fall down around me before I got back. So yeah, letting go and creating workspaces that you don't, have to be there every second for.
And ironically, that probably made you a better professional.
Sure, for sure.
Oh, he uses everything he learned about, managing preschoolers every day. And not at home with the kids.
True.
I know that feeling. How about the other parents?
What were you gonna say?
I was going to say that not being a perfectionist and not always having to do it my way, which Brian already mentioned, like on the home front. But I would say that I was very grateful for the help that we had in our home and really learning how to be a parent, how to juggle everything, from the woman that was our nanny, who was in her 70s and had raised her children and had grandchildren our kids' age. I learned so much from her as a role model that I really think that a lot of my ability to go back and forth in my concentration or my energy or whatever you want to call it, from getting the kids breakfast and running out the door to work and then racing home to relieve whoever's here, I think a lot of that grace came from learning from her. I'm grateful to have had her in our life, and she has really helped me on the parenting front.
Yeah, once again, accept help.
Yeah.
Those who have clue.
Yeah. And like asking questions. She was like a mother mentor, like asking her, what did you do? How do I do this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a phrase I heard a while back that I'll replay in my head often, and I'm no A+ student at it by any means, but it's embrace the suck. There are going to be times that suck. There are going to be times that are hard, and you're just like and maybe that means you do need to go leave the house and go on a walk and just cool off, because you're going crazy. But that's what makes it all real. That's what makes it all happen. That's what makes the good times even better, because there were hard times that came along with it. And if you can learn to, on the professional side, to embrace that a little bit, and on the family side to embrace it, it's again, I'm not perfect at it by any means, but it makes the highs higher.
For sure. So I got one more question, and then let's do a breakout. Wanted to get your thoughts on, what does owning your own business, does it make it easier or harder, and how? That whole juggling. Maybe I'll throw it at Kathy to start us off.
It makes it easier. I mean, to the extent that, Nicole and Neil said, well, you actually, and Elizabeth and Brian too, that you do have a little more flexibility. No matter how, much we wanted to help some of the, employees and things, it was a whole lot easier for me to say, I'm leaving, and I don't even have to go tell anybody that I'm leaving. I'm just going, but for, like for Weave clients, a lot of them are sole proprietors, or they have one other employee, and they don't have any flexibility. If they've got a retail store, or if they are providing a service to somebody like you guys as chiropractors, you can't exactly say, oh, gee, I'm leaving in the middle of this treatment, and because I've got a call from the school that you know, my son fell down. You know, so it's a double-edged sword, but in general, it's always easier when you can call the shots.
Yeah, and then I had heard somebody say along those lines, in some businesses, they say, I eat what I hunt, and if I don't hunt, then I don't get to eat. So I'm guessing the berries feel a bit like that, probably more so.
I think that's a tricky question for us to answer because we had jobs in high school, but this is really the only job we've ever had as professionals. We've never worked for anyone else. So yes, it's easier because I can make my own schedule ahead of time, you know, and do whatever I want in that regard. But I think the emotional gravity of being a sole proprietor or, you know, it's just me or nothing also weighs very heavily on me because if I'm not there, it's not getting done. If Neil's not there, it's not getting done. There's no revenue being generated, whatever it is.
Mhm.
So I think the emotional toll, I think thinking about being an employee, it seems like, oh, well, that's nice. You tell them you're not going to show up and you don't have to worry about all the other things that needs to get done besides your actual job. So I think from the other end of that, I know that's not totally true, but it does seem like being an employee and clocking out at the end of the day has perks.
Right. Go
Yeah.
ahead. Oh, sorry.
I mean, I'll speak to that's a very, very good point. And that was, Elizabeth handled the caregiving primarily, and I was, the breadwinner primarily. So, and I've recently started a company, but as an employee, that was a key part of my calculus for taking a job within a firm so that I could, have that certainty and be able to, be within an organization that, I could, for the periods I did want to pivot into the parenting side, being an employee, there's a benefit to that, assuming you're within a firm. And I think that's an important point for companies, and that's where I hope a lot of this evolves, is that companies become open to, parenting as a component of their employees' lives, and being flexible for them both over the course of a work day and a work week, but also over the course of the arc of our lives. So someone, turns away from their career for 5 years, not having the stigma of re-entering into the path of your career after that time away. I mean, that's a big deal, and that's, so there's a benefit to being an employee because you can rely on that organization. It's a double-edged sword in the truest sense of the word. I don't know if it's a question or an observation, but I think a key part of the conversation is, creating a sort of a culture in workplaces where parents stepping back and taking a break from their career to care for kids full time, not just splitting time or being able to afford childcare, et cetera, but just as a workplace, how do we improve the environment for parents to step away for years and step back in and be able to professionally, carry on without paying a penalty in that regard.
Yeah, it seems like that's a change in the business culture, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. But I do think it's changing. I mean, certainly 25 years ago, you thought a lot harder about stepping out of the workforce. But I know that, for us, when we recruit, and for many of the companies that I advise when they recruit, the question is, why is there a 5-year, 7-year gap in your resume? And if the answer is, I decided to stay home to take care of my family, it most of the time these days it gets okay, fine. And the question is more like, if you're in a technical field like Astrid, are you up to date? You know, you know, have you lost anything? Do we have to, you know, say, okay, what position do we put you in that it might have been different if you were here 7 years ago, because there's something that's moved on in technology. But I don't think that there's as much stigma to stepping away as there used to be. Not certainly as there was when I was
Yeah.
starting my career.
And are there supports then in businesses to help people come back on board? Is that
Mhm.
being set up? Yeah.
Yeah.
Kathy, I did actually have a question in terms of the business leaders around the roundtable here is if you proactively want to do that, because I will say, I don't know if I'm speaking for all of us, but I know I hear you say that it's not a big deal, but that was one of the big reasons that I didn't stay when I did take a break from being a professional. I felt real pressure to get back in there before that gap became too big and I no longer could continue. So is there anything, because ideally that the company you're with works with you, like I think it was Brian that was saying that you actively plan a career and it includes acknowledges that there might be a little bit of a break, and how do they manage that? Do you have any suggestions?
You know, again, there's no one size fits all. So I had a couple of employees at Storts that did step away. I had a young woman who was working for me, and I had just promoted her into a position as an assistant manager of a new division we were developing when she became pregnant, and she had to just to step away. And she was just about ready to move up in her career, and then she didn't really get to do it. Well, 6 years later, we brought her back. She came back and she said, you know, now, and I'm like, okay, you know, I already know you're good. Now the question is, where do we slip you back in? And we didn't put her back in the same position that she was scheduled into when she left. But a year and a half later, the person who was in that position left, and we did move her. And I think that, you know, like if you talk to Procore had a policy where they didn't, you know, downgrade anybody because they've been out of the workforce for a while. Are there companies that still do that? Yeah, there are. But you don't want to work for every company that's out there in the world. You want to work for the ones that are good and you know, that think proactively about the workforce. A good employee with the right skills is a good employee, and it doesn't matter what they did for the last 5 years, as long as they can do the job you want them to do tomorrow.
Am I hearing you that that's even something to advertise as a business?
Yeah. Yeah, and there are people who specialize in helping people get back into the workforce, you know, in helping you make certain that you're stressing the right things on your resume and that you're doing, you know, all of the things that, you know, that don't just send up red flags saying, okay, guess what, guys, I've been gone for 5 years. I mean, you know, that you're stressing this stuff and that you're even bringing forth the things that you did while you were taking time out to parent. So I mean, again, and so I really think
Employee that would have made so much, it would have made life so much better.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if it's a parent looking for childcare or supports, I think a lot of parents know, you know, sort of the courses and classes and the co-op parents, like Elizabeth and Brian talked about the co-op programs. And for businesses who are interested, I feel like there are a number of people who can help. I'm one of them. It doesn't have to be me, but there are lots of resources, and they're growing because there is this new energy around childcare and really making sure that families have what they need.
Mhm.
All right, I'm looking at the clock and seeing that we're just about out of time. Want to give everyone kind of a parting words. I'm going to go ahead according to my screen and just call on you guys. And why don't I have Eileen, since you already got it open, any kind of parting words?
Say hi.
You know, I just wanted to relay, I had read this article just recently in the Harvard Business Review, and it was entitled Advancing Gender Equity as You Lead Out of the Pandemic. And it was really about seizing this moment that, you know, this chaos and everything that's happening is actually an opportunity, and we don't want to go back to the way things were. We want to create what our future is going to be and create the equity that we've sort of been nibbling at around the edges, and actually just make it a little easier to do when there's mess, you know. So you know, seizing the moment and making sure that we move forward and not backward.
Wow, that's inspiring. Thank you. Kathy, how about you?
Pretty much the same thing. I mean, like I said, I've been more encouraged in the last 6 months than I have been in 20 years. That you know, we really have an impetus to pay attention to the problem and to do something. So I see so many of the clients that we deal with at We, who, you know, are just saying, look, I don't care anymore about the career advancement or particularly the pay. What I care about is, can I live my life? Can I take care of my kids? Can I take care of my family? And, you know, can I do it in a reasonable way? Well, employers have to pay attention to that kind of commitment. You can't exist without employees. And so if the employee will stay true to what they need to live their lives, then employers are going to meet the need. They, you know, the good ones, they'll figure it out, and they'll figure it out really quickly.
Thank you, Kathy. How about Nicole and Neil, parting words from you guys?
Well, I think kind of piggybacking on a lot of what's been said there too. Nicole will laugh at this because this is not my strong suit, but and I think this is probably a little bit of what Kathy was speaking to as well. How we're seeing this change is that we are not valued by our production. You are not more valuable if you make more. You are not a more valuable person if you work longer hours, right? Like being able to be home for your kids and do the co-op and be the soccer coach and be the flag football coach. I mean, that's what makes you a great parent and have a balanced life.
And a good person.
And a good person too. So yeah. And I think that, right, like you were saying, that, you know, this change that's been thrown at us has forced a lot of people to go, yeah, I don't want the harder job that's going to give me a little bit more if that means I'm away from my family all the time.
Right.
That has been a huge change in our society, and what a gift. So Elizabeth and Brian, you get final word, unless Nicole, did you want to throw something in before I took it away from you?
No.
Okay.
Just hi to your son.
Say hello.
Hi.
I I would say if you're in a planning stage, plan to hang out with your kids full-time or part-time. You won't get the chance again. I agree. I think the world is changing for the better, and it's starting to appreciate actual realities of family life. But even now, maybe you have to go back and do something different, but I think it's worth it And I think there's on-ramps to something. So just plan to take the time, both people.
Well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate everyone coming. We tried something a little bit different, a little bit more personal. I wanted to give one more shout out to all our panelists. Wanted to give a shout out to David. He's actually was my partner in crime for creating this, by the way. So thank you. Couldn't have done it without you. Thank you so much. Ooh, you're front and center now. And then I also want to shout out to Violet, who also worked very hard with us to make it possible. So thank you to all of you. And with that, I'd like to hand it to Steve to close out the event. Thank you again for your time, everyone. I hope we created something very, very valuable to you.
Thanks, Astrid. And I also want to thank our panelists. I'm inspired. I'm going to share this with my kids who are in their early 20s. I have great hopes that they will have an easier time in our society than my wife and I did. But I'm also inspired. We should go have more kids. Jackie, let's have more kids. It's way easier. Kathy, what how about you?
No.
We've got great programs, wonderful people, and further details and to sign up for everything and anything and to watch this video and watch other videos, ventech.org. Thanks, everybody, and have a good night. Be well.